Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev. We have a lot of very interesting statements and things that are coming from this area. This war must end. Ukraine's problem is not that it is running out of money, it is that it is running out of Ukrainians, says the future US Secretary of State. Trump's nominee Marco Rubio answers questions at a congressional hearing. This war must end. Everyone should be realistic. Russia, Ukraine, and US will have to make concessions. You know, this is a very important statement, and the importance of this statement is not that the Trump's office is seeking for peace or truce with Russia. The most important from this statement is that we see no statements about European countries. We don't see anything about the United Kingdom's interest, about Germany's interest, about France's interest, and obviously there are interests of these countries, and most likely these countries will fight with the future Trump's administration as long as possible, with the purpose to get at least something from Ukraine, and maybe from even the territory of Ukraine, and from possible agreement. Furthermore, we got another important thing, that most of Trump's advisors advocate the creation of a demilitarized zone in Ukraine as a part of the conflict settlement. According to them, the buffer territory should be patrolled by European troops. So this is probably a compromise between the United States of America and European countries. Trump will finish the war, and European countries, according to the Western understanding of the situation, will deploy troops, and they will continue getting money from this situation. But you know that this scenario is unlikely to happen, because the Russians and Russia, Putin, will never accept the presence of United Kingdom French troopers along the line of combat contact patrolling. So because for Putin there is no difference whether the Ukraine joins NATO, or some forces will patrol the line of combat contact from European countries. For Putin it's the same. Also today we got a lot of very interesting statements from Brussels, according to information we have, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte urged the alliance to prepare for a major war, and most likely with Russia. Our future security is at stake. Russia's war against Ukraine continues. Russia's hostile actions against our own countries are intensifying. Cyber attacks, assassination attempts, acts of sabotage, and more. We used to call it a hybrid scheme, but there are the actions of a destabilization campaign. Russia is working hard to weaken our democracies and shake our freedom, and it is not alone. China, North Korea, and Iran are with her. So we see that despite the fact that US and Russia are trying to find a solution, Zelensky tried to find as many as possible allies from the territory of Europe to continue the war with Russia. And most likely the negotiation process is going to be very difficult, and something tells me that anyway the peace and the negotiation process anyway will be resolved on the ground, not in the offices but on the ground. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and as for the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything from the Sudzha direction, and they know that most of the military experts came to conclusion that the Russians realized probably 2 weeks or 1 week ago that they had no chances to restore control over the Kursk direction by the Trump's inauguration. So the Russians decided not to hurry, not to be in a hurry, not to waste people, not to waste resources. They decided to move in this direction slowly, step by step. Sooner or later spring will come, and during this period of time the Russians will have more chances to restore control over this territory. Of course, by the beginning of spring the Russians will improve their positions, but we shouldn't expect some fast lightning attacks with the heavy losses from the Russian side. The Ukrainians continue sending more and more forces in this direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation and not to allow the Russians to take this territory. Now let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupyansk direction. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made several attempts to counterattack Russian forces in the north and Dvorechna, and most of the Ukrainian units that were involved in those operations were destroyed. Very interesting details and updates are coming from the northern Kupyansk direction on the border between the central and the northern directions. And during the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of videos from the eastern part of the Kupyansk pocket. You know that we haven't been receiving from this area anything for a very long period of time. The main clashes were taking place in the northern Kupyansk direction, in Dvorichna, in the vicinity of Krukhove, in the Boguslavka direction, but almost nothing from Pishchano, Stepovo, Novosilka. And today we got a lot of geolocation in this area, and something tells me that in the very near future the Russians most likely will try to improve their positions in this side, and they will try to shorten the lines. This pocket is too huge for the Russians for a major offensive, so most likely during the next period of the special military operation in this direction, the Russians will try to take everything that is located to the east of this red line. So the pocket, the Russians will try to cut the pocket and to get as close as possible to the settlements of Petropavlovka, Kurilovka, and most likely the Russians will try to take the village of Pishchano. Now let's move further. Also, according to geolocations, we see that there are very heavy clashes in the southern Kupyansk direction as well. A lot of geolocations, a lot of videos of how the Russians were attacking and bombing the Ukrainians, and something tells me that currently we can see the preparation before the major offensive operation from the Russian side that is going to take place when the temperature goes far below 0 by Celsius, and this is going to happen during the next week. So which means that the Russians need to begin the preparation. Now let's discuss the situation in the Chasiv Yar direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything. There are very heavy clashes on the territory of the industrial zone. The Ukrainians continue bringing more forces and reinforcement in this direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But despite the resources Ukrainians are spending in this area, the situation slowly and step by step develops in Russian favor. As for the Toretsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we got another adjustment on map. The sources are saying that there are very heavy clashes, already very heavy clashes on the territory of the mine of Toretsk, so in this area. Just yesterday, we have adjusted the map to the south of the mine in Russian favor, and today, since the beginning of the morning, we start receiving updates about very heavy clashes. But the situation is very difficult, and the Ukrainians will try to do everything they can with the purpose to hold the city of Toretsk before the Trump's inauguration. The Russians understand this, and that's why they began another offensive operation in the direction of this road, and the main purpose of the Russians is to cut supply of Ukrainians on the territory of mine, and by this attack to force Ukrainians to fall back. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were attacking and droning the Russian units in the fields that were trying to get this road as close as possible. If the Russians are able to cut the road physically, then most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back, or at least their positions would be weakened by the Russians. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kostiantynivka direction. During the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. According to neutral mappers, the Russians managed to take under control just several tree lines and fields between the settlements of Vozdvizhenka and the settlement of Baranovka. As for pro-Russian sources, today, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to enter the village of Baranovka. This is a very small settlement covered with the trees and this forest, and most likely the Russians will be able to secure the territory by the end of the 16th of January. If this information is correct, then the battle for Tarasovka will begin, and with the fall of these villages like Vodyano Drugoye, Berezovka, Tarasovka and Zelene Polye, the Russians will get a little bit closer to the Kleban-Bytskaya water reservoir with the purpose to create another cauldron for the Ukrainians that are located in these fields. The Russians continue advancing in the Pokrovsk direction. Today we got a few more updates from the territory between Udachna and Kotlina. The pro-Ukrainian sources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to enter the eastern outskirts of the settlement of Udachna and to dig in deeper. Furthermore, according to neutral mappers and also according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under control the first street in the southern part of the settlement of Kotlina along 04, 06 road. So this territory was captured. But the most important thing from the update that was published by the pro-Ukrainian sources is that they increased significantly the contested area and the gray zone. And according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians are currently located on the area of these mines. So maybe there are already clashes for the territory of this industrial zone. If the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, and once again, this territory is already covered as a contested area by pro-Ukrainian sources, then the situation will worsen completely for the Ukrainians in this area. This is going to be a very powerful stronghold for the Russians. They will be able to concentrate forces here to bring some very important things, equipment in this area, and from these positions the Russians will be able to bloom their flower further in the northern and the northwestern directions. Furthermore, the Russians continue advancing from Novosilka in the direction of Alexandriivka along the northern roads. So the village of Uspienovka was already outflanked by the Russians, and most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back. As for the sources on the ground, they are saying that there are still very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are sending one wave of soldiers after another without counting losses. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians suffer significant losses, and most likely they will be forced to fall back under this pressure. After the fall of the settlement of Nova Elizavetovka, the Russians established complete control, FPV drone control, over the settlement of Nova Nadezhinka, the settlement that is located to the northwest of the Nova Elizavetovka. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of geolocations of how the Russians were destroying the abandoned Ukrainian vehicles and how Ukrainians tried to carry out several attempts to counterattack the Russian forces by bringing additional units to the line of combat contact, but everything was destroyed as a result of counter-artillery duels or as a result of anti-tank strikes. So some Ukrainians suffered losses in this area. The concentration of geolocations from this area tell us that the Russians are about to begin another wave of offensive in the direction of this settlement as well. As for the Kurakhove direction, we have a lot of interesting changes. The Russians, according to information we have, continue advancing along the northern dense network of the fortifications, and they have already managed to go through they managed to already pass around 20% of this stronghold, and the Russians are approaching to the road TO515 from the northeast. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the river of Sukhiye Yali. Few more strongholds were captured by the Russians, and the main purpose of the Russians is to attack the settlement of Ulakli from the south by moving along the river of Sukhiye Yali. Different sources, including pro-Ukrainian sources, colored some territories in Russian favor. The territory between the settlement of Dachna and Kostiantynivka, we're talking about these facilities, were captured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. At the same time, the Ukrainians continue sending more and more forces in these fields. Obviously, all these attempts is just several episodes of one big suicide operation. The pocket is under complete Russian FPV and artillery control, and everything that enters this territory will be destroyed by the Russians when they discover this, and they do this very fast. For example, during the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos of how the Russians were attacking and bombing Ukrainian vehicles, Ukrainian units, and Ukrainian soldiers that were trying to evacuate from this territory to escape the cauldron. So this is another cemetery, big Kurakhove cemetery for the armored force of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in Velyka Novosilka, because the most important updates for the previous 12 hours are coming exactly from this area. The Russians established complete control over the settlement. The settlement is under complete Russian fire. The Russians are bombing this territory with artillery, with multiple launch rocket systems, with Storm flamethrower systems. All these things tell us just about one thing. The Russians began the major assault operation, and the main purpose is to break and collapse and defeat the Ukrainians completely before Trump's inauguration. And today, in the morning of the 16th of January of Ukrainian time, we got the first video of how the first Russian assault troopers were entering the Vremivka from the southwest. In this video, we can see a group of 5 Russian soldiers that were entering the village of Vremivka from the southwest. And according to information video, this is not a fresh video that was made, let's say today or yesterday. This video is 3 or 5 days old. So the first Russian assault soldiers managed to enter Vremivka around from 5 till 3 days ago. So which means that the Russians during this period of time managed to improve their positions, and maybe, and something tells me that the Russians have already established control over Vremivka along this red line. If this information is correct, then there is no doubts that the village of Velyka Novosilka will be captured by the Russians in the very near future. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.